Little small town Niles has this brutal, savage murder. There are kids that grew up locking their doors and being scared when they went to bed at night just because of this case.
Roxanne Wood in 1987 was married to Terry Wood. Roxanne and Terry went to the bowling alley and arrived in separate cars. Roxanne left earlier than Terry. He just wanted to keep with the fun he was having, and Roxanne wanted to get home and go to bed. Terry arrives home and notices Roxanne laying in the kitchen. He notices a pool of blood on the floor. She was bleeding profusely from her neck.
City police, oh my God, my wife has been murdered. My wife has been murdered.
I answered the phone, and I could tell something was bad wrong. He just broke down. He just said, "Someone murdered your sister." Rock being the rock of the family, she didn't have an enemy out there who just randomly breaks in and does this to someone.
She was sexually assaulted. The assailant left his DNA.
But in terms of the essential evidence, based on what was there, this went cold fairly quickly, did it not?
Based off of what they had to go on, yeah, the DNA technology wasn't there to follow up and go through on, and there was absolutely not a lot more to go off.
How frustrating was it that no one had been arrested?
Oh, beyond frustrating.
I was starting to lose hope. Dr. Ashlyn Kirsten and I had been talking about involving the students at Western in a cold case project.
When we first got the file, it was just an amazing amount of data. It just looked overwhelming.
Some of the documents are older than I am. Then we would have to sort through if it was relevant information or not. Hours upon hours to scan all this stuff.
They were able to organize that report where we were able to put a keyword in and search across that entire document, 3,500 pages.
How important was that?
Hugely important.
I was hopeful that we would be able to solve the case or move the case forward, or that someone who came after us would.
The first thing that I did was I requested access to the case file. It was very easy to read through quite quickly due to the work of the students.
Gabriela Vargas is a genetic genealogist, probably one of the best in the country, if not the world.
But I'm also a pink-haired, tattooed mom from California who enjoys woodworking and gardening.
Describe the size of the DNA material that you had to work with.
It was 28 picograms, so small that you could never see it with the naked eye.
Just a speck of a speck of a speck.
Very,
like the
very,
size of a
very
human cell.
small amount of DNA. It was deemed unsolvable prior to my involvement. Roxanne Wood's family was my motivation for working as hard and as fast as I did. They never gave up hope that one day justice would be served. They have a Facebook page. Janet Wood had made a post on the page, "One day, Rock, one day." And I screamed out at the top of my lungs, "No, today's your day, Rock, today's your day."
Brad Woods remembers February 20th, 1987, like it was yesterday. He was just 14 years old.
I was getting ready for school, and I can remember my mom pounding on the bathroom door saying to hurry up. She needed to talk to me.
Hours earlier, Brad's 30-year-old sister Roxanne, known as Rock, had been nearby in her Niles, Michigan home alone when she was viciously attacked, her throat slashed.
When I came out, she had told me that she had gotten a call that Rock had been killed.
Devastated, Roxanne's family couldn't imagine why anyone would want to harm her.
She always made people think you were her best friend. She just loved everyone. High school graduation, gorgeous hair.
She definitely had the hair.
She was tall, statuesque. She dressed to the nines. That was very important to her. She was very classy.
Janet Wood could not help but admire her older sister. Their parents were divorced, and Roxanne had taken on a maternal role with her siblings.
With divorced parents, a lot of times you feel like you're being shuffled between, house to house. And the one thing that was always stable for me was Rock.
She was being mom to you.
Yeah. Rock, she was always there.
She was your rock.
She was.
Roxanne's last name would eventually change from Woods to Wood.
In walks Terry and Rock.
After meeting future husband Terry Wood, shortly after she graduated from high school.
She was working at his father's company. Terry was still in high school on the wrestling team. And in he walks, and he's in his wrestling shorts and whatever. She said that was the nicest looking legs she ever saw. And she was just smitten by him right away.
Roxanne and Terry married in 1982.
She said it was the happiest day of her life.
6 years later, Janet would change her name from Woods to Wood as well when she married Terry's brother Rob. Both brothers wound up working for the family business. For Roxanne and Terry, it proved to be a bit too much togetherness.
They got dressed in the morning together, and they rode to work together, and they came home for lunch together, and then they went back to work together.
Roxanne's solution? Taking a job in nearby South Bend, Indiana. A little time apart seemed to help the marriage.
Very, very content, happy, looking forward to starting a family.
February 19th, 1987 started out as a typical Thursday evening for the couple. They met for dinner at a restaurant in downtown Niles after work, and then went to a local bowling alley, arriving in separate cars.
From the report, you could tell when Roxanne entered that bowling alley, all eyes were on her.
Michigan State Police Detective Sergeant John Moore.
There wasn't a whole lot of ladies there because this was the men's bowling league, so she drew some attention.
As midnight approached, Roxanne was ready to call it a night, but Terry wanted to stay.
There's witnesses where Terry and she said goodnight to each other. Hug, kissed, love you, drive safe.
After Roxanne headed home, Terry stayed behind and bowled another game. He then headed home and arrived here about 45 minutes after his wife. Terry entered the house through the garage, and once inside, he came upon a horrific sight.
She was laying on the floor. She had her nightgown on. He said there was a lot of blood.
According to Detective First Lieutenant Chuck Christensen, Terry said he rushed over to Roxanne.
He got behind her, according to him, and picked her head up and held her head in his hands. To see if she was alive? To see if she was alive, yes.
Finding no signs of life, Terry grabbed the phone and called the local police station.
She is dead. She has been cut.
Terry noticed that her panties were down around her knee/ankle area. Her nightgown was pulled up.
Now listen to me, okay?
At times, Terry seemed to get belligerent with the person trying to help him.
I'm gonna get some information from you. I want to get a car started, okay? The car started. No, they are started. No.
The dispatcher kept Terry on the phone.
Don't scream into the phone because the phone distorts and I can't understand you that well, okay? You got a recording. No, I'm trying to get some information from you, okay? Yeah, right.
Terry's aggressive demeanor on the phone quickly became a red flag, according to investigators.
Is that suspicious behavior to you?
It's a bit suspicious. Typically, they're in shock, distraught, but not normally do you hear that anger component in there to the level that it is in this one.
Detective Sergeant Jason Bailey says a seed of suspicion grew even more once police arrived at the home.
He definitely had fits of rage. I know at one point he was screaming they wanted a supervisor, a sergeant there.
Is he making himself a suspect by this kind of behavior?
Everybody reacts differently, but based on this abnormal reaction, I believe he was making himself a suspect.
First responders eventually had no choice but to subdue Terry by placing him in the back of a patrol car. And when they drove him down to the police post for routine questioning, Terry quickly asked for an attorney, which set off more alarm bells for investigators.
The detective at that time told him within 5 to 10 minutes, "You did this, and I will not rest until I put you away forever."
An investigator said that to Terry.
Terry.
I believe you're the killer.
I believe you're the killer, and I will not rest until you're behind bars.
As investigators began piecing together clues in Roxanne Wood's rape and murder, the emerging picture offered up just one suspect, her husband Terry.
There was no sign of any forced entry.
Did that raise eyebrows?
Absolutely.
But Terry told police they'd been having problems with the lock on the back door, claiming it didn't work. Investigators, however, remain suspicious.
We have a sheath up here of a fillet knife located near the body.
That fillet knife, presumed to be the murder weapon, had been taken from a kitchen drawer. It was never found.
That would be odd that a killer would come to a house without a weapon.
Terry told police that he'd slipped in Roxanne's blood as he lifted her head to check on her. But there were no blood smears indicating he'd actually done that. Investigators thought they discovered a potential motive when they looked into Roxanne and Terry's past.
We did uncover a extramarital affair by both parties.
By both parties?
Yeah.
And so when you have a murder like this and you learn there was some infidelity, are you wondering, could jealousy have been a motive?
Absolutely.
I remember the detective saying it was rage. Only someone close to her would have this kind of rage. I never bought that.
Janet firmly believed in Terry's innocence.
I just knew him too well, so that just didn't fit with what I knew. Terry wasn't a rageful guy. He may have a sharp tongue occasionally, but never a violent person.
Despite strongly suspecting Terry, investigators didn't believe there was enough evidence to charge him. After just a few months, the case went cold, leaving a cloud of suspicion hanging over Terry. He declined our request for an interview.
I'd heard stories that at times he'd walk into a place and somebody would call him Slash.
DNA was left at the crime scene. A sample was preserved, but given the limitations on technology back in 1987, not much could be done with it. Still, Roxanne's family never gave up.
I didn't lose hope, ever. I mean, this guy just didn't do this and then lead a clean, pristine life the rest of his life.
DNA technology evolved, eventually allowing the sample to be uploaded to the criminal database CODIS in 1999. But no match was returned. As disappointing as that was, everyone was hopeful that the DNA would at least clear Terry when it was tested against his. The result, it wasn't Terry's DNA.
So did that eliminate Terry as a person of interest, as a suspect in this case?
No.
Why not? It's not his semen.
Just because you find semen in somebody doesn't necessarily mean that that person is the one that killed them.
After that, the case offered no new leads until 2020.
After more than 3 decades of compiling thousands of reports, police were drowning in paperwork. That's when a professor and an innovative group of students here at Western Michigan University figured out a way to speed up the investigation.
The real-world experience, I think, is priceless. See that marine?
Dr. Ashlyn Kirsten teaches a criminal justice studies program.
Scan a category.
For years, she's been talking to Detective Christensen about how her students might help on a cold case.
What a great partnership that would be if we could ever make something like that happen.
So the professor and the detective came up with a plan. Dr. Kirsten's students would process around 3,500 pages of documents, accumulated since the day Roxanne was murdered, into a single digitized database. Samantha Rogers was one of several students who worked on the case.
The officers are able to search by name and see if they've already been interviewed, if they needed a follow-up. They can search locations, things that they wouldn't be able to do just flipping through thousands of pages.
Mackenzie Stoneman says the decades-old files were a solemn reminder of how long some victims wait for justice.
It gave a sense of gravity to what we were doing, that these cases have gone unsolved for that long.
Around the same time the students began crunching data, Christensen decided it was time for a Hail Mary pass. Colleen Fitzpatrick is the president and founder of Identifinders International, a company that specializes in genetic genealogy.
It's been used in forensic cases to help identify unidentified remains and violent offenders for violent crimes.
Christensen hired her genealogy company to examine the tiny amount of DNA left from Roxanne's case.
We found out there was what I would call a gnat's eyebrow of DNA left, about 3% of what we normally use. That was the lowest amount of DNA we've ever had to work with to solve a case.
Identifinders spent about 10 months working with the data the sample produced, but came up empty.
It really did feel impossible. It really did.
Then one day in April 2021, Colleen happened to be chatting with investigative genetic genealogist Gabriela Vargas, who worked as a consultant for Identifinders.
And I said, well, why don't you let me look at it? I concluded that I did not stand with the others. I believed that this case was extremely solvable, and I believed that I could solve it.
So Gabriela got to work. Incredibly, she was able to generate a genetic profile from the killer's trace DNA.
It tells me where their ancestral origins come from. Are they Eastern European? Are they Mediterranean? Are they African American?
And what was the race of this person?
Caucasian.
Gabriela then turned to an online DNA service. When consumers use DNA sites like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, they can take their results and upload them to a broader database called GEDmatch in the hope of finding more relatives.
They can choose to opt into law enforcement matching. If they do that, I can see if they are a match to my suspect.
Gabriela was able to use GEDmatch and the genetic profile she developed to start to build the family tree of Roxanne's killer.
How far back did you go in time?
One side of the tree, the ancestor was 1823. On the other side, the top ancestor was 1797. Essentially, what we're looking for amongst these matches are where they connect to each other, and it led me to a union couple.
A union couple is where two sides of the family tree meet.
This couple was born around 1920. Based on that, we can presume that they would have kids around 1940, maybe 1950. It would have to be one of their children.
The couple she found had 3 sons. She let the detectives know. They did background checks and eliminated 2 of the 3 brothers as possibilities. They were down to the last brother.
He's been involved in a lot of different things.
Violent things?
Violent things, sexual deviant things, you name it, he's probably been involved in it.
And you connect the DNA with someone who has a history of violent behavior, and you got yourself a suspect.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about sharing your DNA search results with law enforcement? Join the conversation now on social media.
After 34 years and one last chance at solving this case, with a speck of DNA too small to see with the human eye, Detective Chuck Christensen's daring bet paid off big.
And to know that we had come to this point was simply amazing.
Michigan State Police now believed they had finally tracked down Roxanne Wood's killer.
We were confident now we were going to solve this and make an arrest.
You could now pinpoint who that individual was that had committed these awful crimes. And who is that person?
That individual's Patrick Gillum.
Patrick Gillum, a man who was living just a few miles from where he allegedly raped and murdered Roxanne Wood. And it turns out he had a troubled past.
Had been a drinker.
Is he into drugs?
He's into drugs, just an individual that was lost in life and a bad individual based on his background.
When detectives dug into Gillum's criminal history, they found a connection to another disturbing case 8 years before Roxanne's attack.
My wife, Maureen, was attacked by Patrick Gillum in 1979.
Robert and Maureen Farrig and their 2 young daughters lived in Gary, Indiana, back in September of 1979.
We were just kind of blossoming into adulthood with the kids, with our lifestyle, with our jobs.
Robert was economic director for the city, and Maureen was an art teacher at the local middle school.
What is it about Maureen that you fell in love with?
Wow. I can't say one thing only. She was very attractive, which has caught my eye. She was so nice. People gravitated to her because of her warm personality.
One night, while making his way home from a business trip, Robert called Maureen with a favor.
I said, Maureen, I don't have my keys to the house, so could you leave the side door open?
At around 11 at night, Robert turned onto his street. He'll never forget what he saw.
When I pull up, I see the police cars.
Robert quickly found Maureen, who calmly told him she was in bed when she was startled awake by a noise downstairs.
Maureen sees this guy going through her purse. He got scared, whatever, and chased her. Maureen started going upstairs, and he grabbed her at the bottom of the stairs and got on top of her. And he tried his best to molest her. He wasn't successful.
Maureen told Robert the man then took her purse and fled. Throughout the attack, Maureen had stayed quiet. She didn't want to awaken her 2 girls.
That takes an incredible amount of courage. She was willing to sacrifice herself there, if need be, to protect her 1- and 3-year-old daughters.
Maureen had a lot more than courage. She had strength.
About a week later, Gillum was pulled over in Gary for a traffic violation. A police officer noticed credit cards on the seat next to him. They were Maureen's.
Police officer called me and said, we picked the guy up. We're bringing him into the station.
When he was interviewed by police, he said, all I remember is going into the house and I blacked out and woke up with my pants around my ankles.
Patrick Gillum was charged with burglary and unlawful deviant conduct. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 14 years in Indiana State Prison.
How did you go on with life from that point?
We forgot about it. We changed our house, we changed our neighborhood. She never told anybody because she felt that was a private issue.
Patrick Gillum served just 7 years of his 14-year sentence. About 4 months after his release, police believe Gillum assaulted Roxanne Wood.
Criminals learn as they go, and I believe he learned from that first crime he did that I better not leave this witness alive because I will be in prison for a long, long time.
Maureen died in 2018 from cancer, not knowing anything about the Roxanne Wood case. Now, armed with their DNA evidence, investigators were ready to move in on Patrick Gillum.
At this point, we decide to get a surreptitious sample to compare to the profile that we had from Roxanne Wood from the scene. And we do this through our undercover surveillance team.
I'm Ryan Cotty, and I am a trooper with the Michigan State Police.
And you do some undercover work from time to time?
I do. I'm assigned with the Fugitive Recovery Team for the 5th District.
In May 2021, Cotty and his team surveilled Gillum in South Bend for days on end and picked up a crucial clue that would aid them in collecting his DNA.
We noticed that he was a smoker.
And why does that help you?
Just in the simple fact that, when you're smoking, it's a great source of DNA. You have your lips directly on the butt of the cigarette, and your saliva gets in the cigarette.
Hot on Gillum's tail, the team witnessed their target flick a cigarette butt outside his truck window while driving.
And so, oh boy, you're rubbing your hands, you're going, this is going to be that final piece of the puzzle that you had talked about,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But there's a twist. We sent that up to the lab right away. A couple days later, the lab director calls me and he said, it's not a match. DNA is DNA. If it's not a match, it's not a match.
Detective Moore says investigators were shocked when the lab called to say the DNA sample from Patrick Gillum's cigarette butt did not match Roxanne's killer.
We were scratching our heads. I called the trooper that grabbed that cigarette butt, and I said, is there any way at all that you lost sight of that when it flipped out of his finger? And he said, a car drove by right then.
It was possible the cigarette butt tested was not Gillum's.
The only thing logically that we can do is go back and get another one.
So undercover trooper Ryan Cotty headed back to work, once again tailing Gillum.
He pulled into this laundromat, which we saw as a window of opportunity that he would most likely be coming out to take a smoke break.
This time, Cotty was determined not to lose sight of Gillum's discarded cigarette butt for even a moment. And instead of tailing him in a car, Cotty followed Gillum on foot.
I'm not a smoker, and there was a gas station right over on the corner that I saw, and I was like, well, I need to go over and get a pack of cigarettes and sit on the curb next to the laundromat. He came and took a seat probably about 6 to 8 feet away from me, and we had a smoke together.
So how did you strike up a conversation with him?
I just tried to say hi to him, made some small conversation. He liked the Red Wings.
It wasn't long before Gillum finished his cigarette and went back inside.
I saw him throw his cigarette, which was right in about this area. So it was a great situation because the cigarette was by itself. So I pull out a glove and go over, and I picked the cigarette up with my hand.
Was it still smoking?
Oh, it was still warm. Yes, it was. So I wrapped it up inside that glove. I stuck it in my pocket and headed out.
Investigators held their breath until the results from Gillum's cigarette butt came back. It was a perfect match to the DNA left at the 1987 crime scene.
I was ecstatic. I was very, very happy.
But investigators were not yet ready to make an arrest, opting to bring Gillum in for an interview in July 2021.
You're not in trouble. You're here voluntarily.
Detective Bailey says they told Gillum they needed to question him about an old case.
Do you know anybody by the name of Roxanne? He explains to us, I know 2 Roxannes, and he said one's a stripper, one's a drug addict.
Gillum was shown a picture of Roxanne Wood.
That girl look familiar? You ever met her before?
Never met her.
Maybe that's a newer picture, and here's an older picture.
Then, Gillum was shown a second photo of Roxanne.
Never seen her, never met her, don't know who she is. And I said, well, we're here to talk to you about her. This woman's been assaulted.
This is too much for me, man.
You can see his body just tense up and almost to the point of hyperventilation. Hands started shaking, threw his hands, back in the air. I've never had a reaction out of somebody like that in 23 years of doing this.
Does he continue talking?
I gotta talk to my lawyer.
At that time, he requested to speak to his attorney.
I gotta talk to my lawyer, man.
In February 2022, just days shy of the 35th anniversary of Roxanne's murder, Patrick Gillum was arrested at his South Bend, Indiana home.
An answer a family has waited 35 years for.
Roxanne's brother, Brad Woods.
It didn't seem real. It was nothing like I had ever played in my mind of how I would be when they came to the door to say, we've got him.
Detective Christensen then met face-to-face with the man who had lived for decades with cruel rumors and doubt, Terry Wood.
I sat him down, explained he was no longer a person of interest, and we knew he had nothing to do with it.
How did he react?
He was very emotional. He started crying, of course, was bewildered and in shock.
As a 35-year-old burden was lifted off Terry, the hammer was about to fall for Gillum.
You're under arrest, okay?
Investigators questioned him for 5.5 hours at a police station in South Bend, with Gillum only asking for an attorney at the very end. At times, he spoke in circles.
I can't believe I did it if I did it. Well, you're saying I did, so.
When pressed on it, he kept saying, you guys are telling me I did this, and if I did this, I'm a monster.
I'm a monster, man. If I did that, that's a monster. That's a monster, man.
Only a monster would do this.
Let me ask you this. How do you think your DNA was found with her?
I have no clue.
How do you think?
I have no clue, man.
Said that several times during the interview. When he was confronted with the case facts, he kept saying, I don't remember.
I don't remember, man.
I don't remember doing that.
But Janet says Gillum's reaction when he was questioned 7 months prior proved he was lying now.
He visibly reacted, shook like a leaf, leaned back in his chair, pounding his chest.
I gotta talk to my lawyer.
I think I need a lawyer. You tell me he doesn't remember what he did.
Gillum was charged with Roxanne's murder, but had a golden opportunity to apprehend him. Decades earlier, slipped through investigators' fingers.
I truly believe that I would have been raped and murdered.
See more of the evidence and timeline at 48hours.com.
In the summer of 1987, just months after Roxanne Wood was murdered in her home, her alleged killer crossed paths with yet another woman. It was a hot night in South Bend, Indiana, when Rose Caparel went outside to her front lawn.
I was standing down there watering, and all of a sudden I hear this loud car coming down the street.
Rose, standing alone, says she noticed a blue El Camino, similar to this one, driven by a stranger, getting closer.
I looked, and he had a taillight out on the car. About 3-4 minutes later, I hear the same car coming back down this street.
Now, it had a bad muffler, right?
Oh, the muffler was loud. I just got a feeling that something just wasn't right. And by the time I got halfway to my front door, a man came around the corner of the house. He had a stocking cap on, and he had a full beard. All you could basically see was his eyes. I just turned and ran, screaming down the street.
Have you ever run faster in your life than that moment?
And I'm not a runner, and I ran.
Rose says she ran to a neighbor's house and called local police, but the assailant had escaped.
What do you believe would have happened if that man had caught up to you?
My thought was he was going to rape me.
A few days later, while Rose and her family were driving to dinner, her daughter Tina says she spotted that same blue El Camino with a burned-out taillight in a parking lot.
My mom says right away, that's the car.
Stunned, Rose and Tina say they went to call the police, leaving Rose's husband Stan, a retired Marine, waiting for the car's owner.
I came back to my dad holding a gun at the attacker, sitting on the ground.
Tina says her father demanded the man hand over his driver's license. They say the name on that license, Patrick Gillum.
We had never heard the name before.
Rose says the police never arrived, so Stan lowered his gun and let Gillum leave. She says she later reported the incident at the South Bend police station.
We didn't pursue it because we figured, they would be doing something with it.
No arrest was ever made. Decades later, when Rose saw the report of Gillum being arrested for Roxanne Wood's murder, she and Tina decided to tell their story to the Michigan police.
Imagine if the police had come, they might have solved Roxanne Wood's case just a few months after it had occurred.
Possible, yes.
An opportunity lost.
Yeah, it could have went that way.
But in April 2022, Gillum's day of reckoning finally came.
When he walked in, I openly said, piece of I didn't realize I was saying it as loudly as I did.
In a Michigan courtroom, he faced some of the people whose lives he had viciously altered.
And he made eye contact with me. He sat down and he looked up and he stared right in my face.
Even though Gillum had insisted to investigators that he didn't remember murdering Roxanne, he later pleaded no contest to second-degree murder. And now everyone waited for his sentence to be handed down.
It was almost like being face to face with the devil. I remember being shaky and nervous and I just couldn't believe I'm sitting this close to the person that did this.
Brad and Janet finally got the chance to address the man who killed their sister all those years ago.
Patrick Gillum is a very definition of a nightmare. Women fear our whole lives.
Gillum appeared confused, as though he'd seen a ghost when looking at Janet. He wore headphones in order to hear.
Janet does look a lot like Rock. He was probably in shock seeing her sitting there.
His actions gave all of us a life sentence, while he got to live most of his as a free man. And we are here today to see him finally pay something for what he's done, which is likely the rest of his life in a cage, like the vile animal that he is.
It seems people like him tend to find Jesus in prison. Don't bother looking, because the devil will be the only one greeting you.
When it was his turn to speak, Gillum offered an apology and a prayer.
I can't believe I did what I did. And I pray for them every night. And I am so sorry. I just hope that sometime in the future, with God's help, that they can start to forgive me.
The judge sentenced Gillum, who was 67 at the time, to a minimum of 23 years in prison. Sitting in court, Terry Wood, now vindicated, watched as his wife's real killer was led away. Robert Farrig witnessed Terry's pain firsthand.
I shook his hand. He was, shaking, crying. I felt more empathy for him than I could for any other person I've met.
Terry was cleared, and his wife's killer found, thanks in large part to advances in technology. Genetic genealogist Gabriela Vargas, who solved a decades-long cold case in just 4 days, says she's eager to do it again.
As a result of your work, more and more law enforcement agencies will be coming to you, more and more families hoping that you can do your miracle work and solve their cold cases. That's quite a burden for you, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely not. It's an honor. It's an honor to be able to work these cases, to bring justice to these victims and closure to these families, and I will never stop.
As the Wood family finally found some peace, their rock will always be with them, giving them the strength to move forward. Janet remembers a dream she had about her sister.
We were downtown Niles, and she came up and grabbed me. And she goes, Janet. And I was like, oh, Rock, oh my God. And we're walking and walking and walking and just laughing. And all of a sudden I look up and it's dead silent. And we're at the gates of the cemetery. And I said, oh, do you have to go back? And she goes, yes. She goes, but it's fine. She goes, I'm good. She goes, I'm really good. That was it.
Her home became a crime scene.
I knew my mom was in distress.
Her mother's fiance dead.
It was shock.
What really happened?
I didn't even know what to think.
What Angelina Saw. 48 Hours, Saturday on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
When you think of the Phoenix Desert, you definitely aren't thinking of a waterfront. The canal system goes right through the center of Phoenix. The more people that were moving to the area, the more that the trails along there were being used for walking, running, biking. There are not many crimes that are like this one. You had women riding bicycles along the canal on a typical Phoenix evening, ambushed, stabbed multiple times.
Police are looking for whoever killed 22-year-old Angela Brasso.
Angela Brasso dismembered, decapitated. Police are looking at this scene and thinking, what on earth happened and who did this?
10 months later, a 17-year-old junior at Arcadia High School, Melanie Burness. This is the high school that Steven Spielberg attended. Melanie Burness's mother goes out to dinner, and Melanie decides to go on a bike ride. And the following morning, a woman is riding her bike.
Right here, there was just a big puddle. It looked different as I rode through it, and all of a sudden I'm like, that is blood.
So she called the police. The police saw a blood trail, and they see Melanie Burness's body at the bottom of the canal.
My time and my life froze at that very moment, the day we found out. I made a promise to myself. I just never stopped talking about her.
These murders became widely known as the Phoenix Canal murders.
My name is Clark Schwarzkopf, and I was assigned to the cold case unit investigating the canal murders. I think there was over 600 persons of interest. I said, okay, give me the list. In this mound of information of all these people and all these possible suspects, I believed our killer was listed.
Eventually, Detective Schwarzkopf found his prime suspect on that list and discovered that the alleged canal killer had a second identity. A man who dressed up like a comic book superhero and cruised the valley in a decorated car dripping with fake blood. The public knew this man as the Zombie Hunter. What was his life as the Zombie Hunter like? What did he do?
He would go to parades and festivals and show off this car and kind of be a part of the excitement, if you will.
Your assignment was to find this guy, and you have found him.
Yeah.
He is accused of being a killer, but here he is posing with police officers before they discovered what he'd done.
It was almost like a slap in the face, like, I'm here, but you don't know it. It was like he was hiding in plain sight.
It's one of those cases that you just don't forget. You can't unsee what happened to those girls. You just can't.
Long before the man known as the Zombie Hunter became the prime suspect in the Canal murders, Clark Schwarzkopf was a detective with the Phoenix Police Department's Cold Case Squad. His mission was simple but pointed: find the killer responsible for those vicious murders of 2 young women from the early 1990s.
To this day, I'm still not exactly sure about what happened on those bike paths.
The case began on November 8, 1992. Angela Brasso, a tech worker who had recently moved to Phoenix, was taking advantage of beautiful weather to get in a little exercise, says Brianna Whitney, the true crime reporter for the CBS affiliate KPHO in Phoenix.
Each night, she would go out for her evening bike ride, just at golden hour at sunset, the best time to be riding out here.
Angela was only hours away from turning 22 years old. And like a lot of locals, she liked to bike on the paths that ran alongside the city's distinctive canals, says Schwarzkopf, a 48 Hours consultant.
Are there places that are sort of natural ambush sites if somebody wants to attack someone?
Yeah, they are. There's a lot of tunnels that go underneath the interstate.
That November evening in 1992, Angela left her apartment around 7 p.m. Her boyfriend, Joe, later told police. He said he stayed home to bake Angela a birthday cake and didn't expect her to be gone long.
Hours go by, and Joe grows concerned. Angela hasn't come home, and that's not like her.
Joe told police he took his bike out 3 times that night, frantically searching for Angela on the canal paths. He spoke to her friends, even her mother back in Pennsylvania. Finally, he reported Angela missing to police. The next morning, searchers came upon a horrific scene.
Angela Brasso's torso was found in a field next to the trail that she had been riding her bike on.
Angela had been stabbed to death. Some 10 days after Angela's headless body was discovered, a man fishing along this section of the canal spotted her head stuck on a grate.
And from what we have heard from witnesses, the head was in amazingly good condition, especially considering this was days after the murder. I'm Morgan Lowe, and I'll take you.
Morgan Lowe, an investigative reporter who also works at KPHO and is a consultant for 48 Hours, has been working on the Canal Killer case for more than a decade.
We've heard that the head looked like it had been preserved, like it was a memento for the killer.
Angela's purple mountain bike was also missing. There were no solid leads, and the case went quiet until September of 1993, some 10 months after Angela's murder, when the mother of 17-year-old Melanie Burness returned from a dinner date to find her daughter had broken her curfew and was not home. She then noticed that Melanie's bicycle was missing.
Melanie decides to go on a bike ride. By around 10:30, when Melanie did not return. Her mother started calling her friends. Is Melanie there?
Well, my mom took the phone call, said that Melanie's mom was frantic and, nervous.
Rachel Shepmaker was one of Melanie's close friends in high school.
So initially, when you hear that her mother's looking for her, you're not thinking something terrible has happened to your friend.
Definitely not. I thought she was with a friend and just forgot to communicate with her mom where she was.
Early the next morning, Charlotte Pottle, a local resident, happened to be riding along the canal with her young daughter in a bicycle seat. Just as they came out of one of those tunnels that ran under the interstate, she spotted a puddle.
There was just a big puddle of something. Ended up riding right through it and having it splash over me.
Charlotte says something about the puddle bothered her. So a few minutes later, she doubled back. That's when she made that horrible realization.
I could tell that it was a puddle of red, that it was a puddle of blood. And all of a sudden, as I'm looking at it, I noticed that there are some drag marks that went along over here.
Toward that tree?
Towards that tree, yes. And then went around the tree and was dragged back. You could see the drag marks right here to the canal.
Charlotte went home and called police. Later that night, the local news reported that a woman's body had been found in the canal, close to where Angela Brasso's head had been located.
They found the body in a teal bodysuit. I was told by some other friends that Melanie did not own that. It can't be her.
Rachel went to sleep convinced the body in the canal was not Melanie. But the next day,
I'm at school. My friends just come up to me crying and saying, it was Melanie.
detectives strongly suspected Melanie had been targeted and stabbed in the back by the same person who had killed Angela.
Police believe that somehow the killer got her off of her bike, whether he knocked her off of her bike or whether he asked her a question.
Clark says the evidence indicates the killer approached the women from behind.
Both the knife wounds were the exact same position.
Investigators say the killer dragged Melanie's body off the canal path, removed her clothes, and dressed her in that teal bodysuit, similar to this one obtained by police.
Along with the stabbing and the dismemberment, there was another component to these murders, wasn't there?
Yeah, both women were sexually assaulted.
And that meant investigators had a crucial piece of evidence: DNA.
When the DNA from Melanie's scene was finally tested later, it matched to Angela's scene, so we knew for sure that we were dealing with the same perpetrator.
Investigators noted that the initial stab wounds to the backs of each woman were fatal and so precise that detectives suspected the killer might be a surgeon.
The details about what happened were the kinds of things that kept parents from letting their kids out when the sun went down.
The murders of Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness in the early 1990s created fear in Phoenix that lasted for a generation.
You know there's some guy out there and you don't know where he is.
They watched the news and read the newspaper every day, hoping that police would make an arrest. And it just kept going on, and nothing, and nothing, and nothing.
Investigators had collected matching male DNA from both the victims. But more than 2 decades passed, and the canal murder cases went cold. Then, science finally caught up with the calendar.
It's in 2014. Phoenix police detectives are at a DNA conference, and a forensic genealogist from California is also at the conference.
Colleen Fitzpatrick, founder of Identifinders International, was there to meet with law enforcement.
And she goes up to these detectives and says, hey, I can take Y chromosomes and create these DNA profiles and try to match with genealogy to help solve criminal cases.
Fitzpatrick's company had developed software that could mine public genealogy databases, searching for matches to crime scene DNA. The detectives heard her out.
And then several weeks later, they sent me the Y DNA profile from the crime scene for the Phoenix Canal murders.
Fitzpatrick's company started crunching the data, hoping to provide Phoenix detectives with a name.
We entered the numbers from the forensic profile into our software, and that's where I came up with 6 matches to the name Miller.
While the genetic genealogy search produced the name Miller, it is also one of the most common last names. Detective Schwarzkopf started digging.
You check your files, and what do you find?
I think there were a total of 6 Millers that were on what I called my master list. And I went down through the list, got to Brian Patrick Miller.
But who was Brian Patrick Miller? Records show he was 42 years old with a Phoenix address. That name was just one of more than 600 persons of interest who had lived in those case files for years. Police at the time seemingly never pursued Miller.
We discovered his file downstairs.
Police learned Brian Miller had a record dating back to before the Canal murders. In May of 1989, when he was just 16 years old, Miller crossed paths with Celeste Bentley.
I was 24, and I was going to work. I had just noticed a young boy on the bus.
Celeste says she and the boy got off at the same stop. Moments later, she felt something in her back.
He had ran by me. I thought he had just hit me. I just yelled at him. I was like, why'd you do that, you know? And then I reached back and touched my back and realized that it was blood. I had been stabbed.
With a single knife wound to her upper back, Celeste screamed and managed to make it to the store where she worked. A coworker called for help. About 30 minutes later, when Celeste was in the back of an ambulance,
the police came and said they found him, and they wanted to bring him to the ambulance to show him to me.
Celeste identified her assailant. Brian Miller was charged with aggravated assault.
They said that if he had held the blade the other way, he would have gone straight through my ribs and I could have died.
Miller pleaded guilty and was sentenced to juvenile detention until he turned 18. It was a far cry from where Miller's life had begun.
He was living in Hawaii for a while as a kid with his mom and his dad, but his dad died early on in a motorcycle accident.
Years later, Miller and his mother Ellen moved to Phoenix.
So for most of his life and early years, it was Brian Miller and his mom.
While Miller was in juvie, his mother made a disturbing discovery.
Brian Miller's mom was looking through his stuff and she found a note that he wrote.
The pages detailed a sinister plan: kidnap the girl, tie her up in the truck, and cut her clothes off.
This note spelled out how he wanted to find, abduct, rape, murder, and dismember a young woman. And Brian's mom was so disturbed by this piece of paper that she took it to Phoenix police.
It was Miller's 18th birthday, and he had just been released as an adult.
She flat out told the police at the time that she was really scared for her safety and that she was not going to allow him to come home.
So after his release, Miller ended up at this Phoenix halfway house. When Schwarzkopf read that note in 2014, he was struck by something.
There was a lot of things in there that were close or similar to what happened specifically to Angela,
including a description of decapitating a victim and preserving the head. Phoenix police wanted to locate Miller. Luckily, he was very easy to find. In December 2014, Phoenix police continued digging into potential suspect Brian Miller, who they discovered was actually a local celebrity.
Everybody at the time in the Phoenix area knew Brian Patrick Miller as this character called the Zombie Hunter.
The Zombie Hunter, like a comic book character?
Yeah, like a comic book character, like a good guy fighting the bad guys.
Miller's alter ego was a costume figure who participated in parades and festivals around town.
Thousands of zombies taking over the streets of downtown Phoenix.
He wore this long trench coat with these goggles and helmet and had this large Gatling gun.
And if you're going to hunt zombies, you need a way to get around.
He bought an old police car and tricked it out, wrote the Zombie Hunter on it.
And it had a full-size zombie mannequin in the back and blood on the side.
Friend Eric Braverman says Miller's Zombie Hunter persona attracted a big fan base, including law enforcement officers who lined up to pose with him.
Collected pictures of himself with the cops like trophies. They're all smiling big with him, leaning on the car.
Eric says Miller's superhero character was the opposite of what Brian was like when he wasn't in costume.
He seemed like a harmless marshmallow that was immersed in this goofy lifestyle. He's just that unassuming guy.
But could Miller be the Canal Killer? The only way to find out was to get his DNA. Investigators began to surveil Miller, who worked at an Amazon warehouse. Every day when he got there, Miller parked the zombie mobile in the same spot.
He would come out for his 15-minute break, blast his music really loud. Lunchtime, came out to the car, same thing, blast this god-awful music.
Schwarzkopf came up with an elaborate plan to get his DNA.
I went up and introduced myself to Miller. He was in his car.
What did you introduce yourself
I introduced myself as a security consultant.
Schwarzkopf told Miller that thieves had been stealing goods from a warehouse across the way.
I said, would you be interested in working for me as a security officer, watching the building while you're outside?
Did his eyes light up?
Yeah, because it was a good paying job. I said, look, I'll pay you $20 an hour.
On January 2nd, 2015, Schwarzkopf met Miller at this Chili's restaurant to fill out a job application. The cold case unit was behind the scenes, ready to bag anything that had Miller's DNA on it, such as utensils or a glass.
They set a table for me and Mr. Miller away from everybody else in a part of the restaurant where nobody else is at.
Miller arrived with a surprise guest, his 15-year-old daughter, Sarah. Miller was a divorced single dad.
He was very gentle and caring about his daughter. He often brought his daughter where he would be going.
The trio sat down and ordered hamburgers. When the food arrived,
he swallows his hamburger in like 5 bites, won't take a drink of his water, and I'm sitting there going, are you sure you don't want something else to drink? Because you just got water? No, I'm good.
Schwarzkopf started to worry this operation would be a bust.
What does he finally do that makes this mission accomplished?
We finally took a drink from the water glass. That's when I knew that, okay, now we've at least got his DNA.
Despite knowing about Miller's juvenile record, as their meal ended, the veteran detective's gut told him Miller was not their man.
Seeing him with his daughter, I just don't see this guy as being the monster in 1992 and 93 that would do this to these women.
Miller gave Schwarzkopf a quick tour of his zombie hunter mobile, and the two parted ways, with the detective saying he'd be in touch. The cold case unit sent Miller's water glass off to the crime lab. 11 days later,
we got a call from the lab, and we're sitting there and we're like, what is this all about?
And in this meeting, these Phoenix detectives say, as a joke, they must have solved the Canal murders.
But Detective Schwarzkopf says it was no joke when the head of the lab arrived.
She leans down to me, she goes, it's him. I go, what? She goes, Brian Miller, it's him. Well, the blood rushed from my head. I kind of sat back and I went, you've got to be kidding.
Brian Miller's DNA from that water glass matched the DNA recovered from Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness more than 20 years before. Miller was arrested within hours. During a police interview shortly after, Miller was told why he'd been taken into custody in connection with the Canal murders.
We have DNA that links you to those two ladies.
See how that's possible.
He just kind of went through it in his dopey, kind of, I don't know what you're kind of talking about.
It would help you get it off your chest if you did something like that.
I didn't kill anyone.
You didn't kill anybody?
No.
Investigators got a search warrant for Miller's house, the home he shared with his teenage daughter, and just about everything he'd ever collected in his life.
I can remember like it was yesterday, walking up to the front door and everybody going, you can't get in that way. It's full of crap.
Brian Miller's house was like it came from the show Hoarders.
There was a little path where you could get to a bathroom and the kitchen and where the TV was, and that's it. Everything else is just stacked to the roof with garbage.
Did you look around and go, this is madness?
Not only madness, I go, this is a nightmare.
Schwarzkopf and his investigators would have to sift through all of it, looking for other possible evidence. Detective Schwarzkopf also focused on a new source, someone Miller himself had ominously singled out in his interview.
It's the one person on the face of the earth I could probably honestly say I hate.
Miller's ex-wife, Amy, who would end up revealing gruesome details from Miller's violent past.
He had told her about the murder of a young girl who'd come to his door accidentally.
What do you think motivated Brian Miller to dress up as the Zombie Hunter? See more of the case on Facebook at 48 Hours.
In January 2015, more than 21 years after the Canal murders, Brian Miller was charged with first-degree murder in both Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness's deaths. Melanie's friend Rachel Shepmaker says she felt a wave of relief.
A very joyous moment of, oh my gosh, this is what we've been waiting for decades upon decades.
Detective Schwarzkopf wanted to talk to the one person who probably knew Miller best, his ex-wife, Amy.
They had been married for 8 years. There was a divorce.
Amy told Schwarzkopf that she was just 19 when she met Miller in 1996. They married less than a year later and moved to Everett, Washington. Amy had a shocking revelation for the detective. She told Schwarzkopf Miller had revealed a gruesome secret to her, that he had killed a young girl in Phoenix years earlier, before he'd ever met Amy. Schwarzkopf says Amy never reported it to police before for a number of reasons. She didn't know if it was true, she was afraid of Miller, and she said she wanted to be a good wife.
You support your man no matter what.
Detective Schwarzkopf says Amy told him what Miller had said.
That a young girl had come to his door, that he had grabbed this young female, pulled her in, killed her immediately.
Amy said Miller told her he dismembered the girl and disposed of her remains in trash left on the curb. Although Amy claimed Miller never told her the child's name, investigators used the information Amy provided to piece together who Miller may have been talking about.
13-year-old Brandy Myers was a little girl collecting money for a school bookathon in her North Phoenix neighborhood, going door to door.
I was a tomboy and she was a girly girl.
Brandy's sister, Kristen Dennis.
So she would try to learn how to climb trees or jump fences because she wanted to play with me. She was my best friend.
It was May 26, 1992, 6 months prior to the murder of Angela Brasso. Miller was living in the halfway house following his time in juvenile detention for the aggravated assault of Celeste Bentley.
This is 1 block from our school, his home, and then 3 blocks is our house. So every single day, we walked right by here.
Kristen says Brandy left home alone that evening, never to return.
She was last seen 2 doors down from Brian's, walking in the direction of his house.
Despite an extensive search, Brandy's body was never found. Schwarzkopf says even though Amy couldn't provide a name, the clues in her account add up to just one conclusion.
I believe that person is, in fact, Brandy Myers.
Her sister believes that as well.
Brandy went to the landfill like something of no importance.
Even with Amy's account, investigators did not have enough evidence to charge Miller in Brandy's disappearance.
So the fact that she was disposed of, there's just nothing physical, nothing forensically to grab onto.
48 Hours contacted Miller, who said he had no involvement in Brandy's disappearance and never confessed to Amy that he had killed a young girl. But there is another case in Miller's past.
In 2002, a woman named Melissa Ruiz Ramirez is walking down the street in Everett at night. Somebody pulls over.
It was Brian Miller. Melissa would later tell police she'd seen him before talking to a friend of hers. Melissa said she got in Miller's car and told him she needed to make a call, and he drove her to his workplace so she could use the phone.
She tells police she's on the phone, and from out of the clear blue, Brian Miller comes running out with a 12-inch serrated kitchen knife and stabs her in the back. They fight over the weapon.
Melissa said she escaped and contacted police. They picked up Miller shortly after. He didn't deny stabbing Melissa, but claimed it was self-defense. He said he was at work when Melissa walked in off the street and asked to make a call.
He said she goes to use the phone, and then all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, she tries to rob him with a knife.
Miller was arrested and charged with first-degree assault with a deadly weapon. He was jailed from May 2002 until his December trial.
The jury just didn't buy Melissa's story. It was a he said, she said, and they acquitted him of the charge.
Amy says a chilling change followed Miller's return home. She said it began with the letters she'd received from her jailed husband while he awaited trial.
They first started out as professing his innocence, and then it would turn into sexual deviance. Like, here's what I'm gonna do when I get out to you.
Amy told Schwarzkopf that Miller followed up his words with action.
She said he came back with an unbelievable, ugly, dark, sexual deviant side that she'd never seen before. There were times where there was sex between them where he held a knife to her throat.
Amy told Schwarzkopf that Miller claimed something happened to him as a child, something that would become the cornerstone of his defense for murdering Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness. His unique defense?
Call the first witness.
His mother had created a monster. At the start of Brian Miller's trial for the murders of Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness in October 2022, his attorneys opened with a startling defense. They admitted their client was the Canal Killer.
They had to concede right off the bat that he is the actual killer, but that he was not guilty by reason of insanity.
His defense attorneys say Miller was tortured by his mother, Ellen, as a child, and that led to his violent sexual behavior. She died in 2010.
If you imagine the making of a monster, this is kind of the household that story begins in.
Miller told investigators after his arrest that the beatings began when he was just 5 years old.
She was a detention officer. Discipline in their house was mental as well as physical.
She used her security belt, so it was like a law enforcement belt, and usually I got hit by the buckles.
The defense opted for a bench trial, which meant there would be no jury. His lawyers told Judge Suzanne Cohen that Miller's mother also exposed her young son to violent sexual content.
He was exposed to her interests in pornography and extremely violent films.
Miller's lawyers said his mother's abuse caused Miller to develop severe mental health problems.
He feels like there are different TVs playing in his head.
Psychologist Bethany Brand testified that Miller developed a condition known as dissociative amnesia, an inability to remember some traumatic events. Morgan Lowe summed up the defense argument.
There were two Brians. There's the one you see over there at the defense table, who's a fairly normal person, who has friends, who had a job, who was a dad, who was a husband. And then there's the killer. There's Bad Brian.
And Miller claimed his attorneys had no memory, none, of the two murders he was charged with. Prosecutors undermine the defense claim that Miller has no memory of the killings. They point out that he does remember details related to other stabbings. Remember, Miller admitted stabbing Celeste Bentley when he was 16 years old. And in 2002, he had also testified about the stabbing of Melissa Ruiz Ramirez in Washington. To show Miller's deviant side, prosecutors called the only person in the world Miller said he despised, his ex-wife, Amy. The judge did not allow cameras to record her face. Under questioning by prosecutor Elizabeth Reamer, Amy testified that later in their marriage, Miller grew increasingly violent during sex.
Did you ever say anything to him about wanting it to stop because it was scary?
No.
Why not?
I was avoiding any confrontation with him at all at that point and wanted to be as compliant as possible so that I would stay where he loved me enough not to kill me.
Did he ask permission prior to using needles on you?
No.
Did he ask permission prior to tying you up?
No.
What percentage of your sex life after he got out of jail in Washington included bondage, the pins, or other things that were not the normal sex you'd been having early in your marriage?
Probably at least 95%.
The trial continued, and after 6 months and 36 witnesses, the judge delivered her verdict.
As to count 1, first-degree murder, Angela Brasso, as follows: guilty. As to count 2, first-degree murder, victim Melanie Bernis, as follows: guilty.
How did Brian Miller react to the guilty verdict?
He didn't react. He didn't give any real emotion.
But Angela's mother, who addressed the court remotely, was emotional.
The defendant broke my heart, took all hope and light from me and my family. The hole in my heart is so big and empty.
Melanie's older sister Jill also spoke remotely about how painful it was that Melanie's life ended violently at the age of 17.
For 30 years now, we've had to live without Melanie because the defendant murdered her. Words cannot even begin to describe the level of excruciating pain we experienced with the news of her horrific death.
Miller, who didn't take the stand during his trial, was allowed to give a statement before he was sentenced.
I'm not looking for sympathy today. This time is for the family and the friends of the victims. I cannot imagine what pain they have endured for all these years. I know I am different. I thought it had to do with what my mother did to me.
Defense counsel R.J. Parker urged Judge Cohen to show mercy before she delivered her judgment on Miller's sentence, life in prison or death.
You do not have to kill Brian in order to see justice done.
Judge Cohen agreed with the centerpiece of the defense case.
The defendant's abuse as a child was proven.
But 8 months after the trial began, Miller's abuse at the hands of his mother did not dissuade Judge Cohen from handing down the ultimate sentence.
There is no question that what the defendant did deserves the death penalty. Mr. Miller, anything you wish to say to the court?
I guess thanks for listening to everything that was said and giving us at least the opportunity to try and convince you otherwise.
Justice was carried out in this case.
Detective Schwarzkopf hopes family and friends of Angela and Melanie might finally find some peace. People like Rachel Shepmaker.
Just knowing that justice was served, it doesn't make anything easier.
How do you want your good friend be remembered?
Just that she's the all-American good kid. I want her family to know that we haven't forgotten her. She's changed us all for the better. She was a gift.
A knock at the door by a clown, an evil clown.
The evil clowns you see in the movies, well, it came to life.
Who comes calling with balloons, flowers, and a gun.
I heard bang. I saw her fall.
This was an assassination. Who isn't afraid of a killer clown?
48 Hours, Saturday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
I'm Julia Cowley, retired FBI agent and profiler, and former special agent forensic scientist with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. This podcast is about criminal profiling.
This is certainly an unusual case. I've never seen anything quite like this one.
Many serial killers, it's the killing part that they enjoy. And once they've killed the person, they're done. Not Mark Twitchell.
Action.
Mark Twitchell was an aspiring filmmaker. I interviewed him for my book, and we corresponded for a number of years. He wrote me probably 30 or 35 different letters, up to about 350 pages of letters. In one letter, Mark Twitchell wrote back to me, and this is what he said. The fact is, society in general has a deep and profound fascination with the dark side of human nature.
I do think Mark Twitchell was using the filmmaking as an outlet to live out his fantasies, and it ultimately wasn't enough for him. And that's why his fantasies crossed into reality. I think Mark Twitchell believes that he is very smart, very methodical, very logical, very level-headed, much like the character of Dexter Morgan.
And so I think he got ideas from the show. I think he was drawn to the character because that's what he wanted to be.
There's significant links to Dexter. He had a kill room set up with plastic sheeting. He had a table set up for his victims. He had this kind of processing kit that was very similar to what Dexter uses.
Never once did it cross his mind he'd ever be caught. They aren't going to catch me. I'm too smart. Nothing's going to lead them to me. Our job is to put together the pieces of the puzzle, and in this case, we had a written document.
There was this document titled SK Confessions, found in a deleted form on Mark Twitchell's laptop, and it appeared to read like a diary. This is the story of my progression into becoming a serial killer, and it documented luring people off the internet. His first victim was a man named Gilles Tetreault.
I saw this lady. She had blonde hair. She was about 5'6". She was very attractive looking.
And what was her name?
Her name was Sheena.
Sheena.
Yeah. I messaged her. She messaged me back. How about we go to dinner and a movie? I thought that was a great idea. She wouldn't give me the house number, but she just sent me really, really good directions on how to get there.
He thought, right, what's the worst that could happen?
It would appear that I'm unique in the world. There is no key, no root cause.
There's
no school. I really were capable of premeditated murder. Normal, healthy, well-adjusted, 30-year-old men. I once heard the legend of another worthy victim, wonderful young children, and great futures. I dealt with his remains in a disrespectful manner that traumatized me forever. Into psychopathic serial killers. My compassion, I quickly grew to resent and hate this man.
These are the words of Mark Twitchell, written to author Steve Lillabew.
It is what it is, and I am what I am.
For the first time on television, Lillabew is revealing the contents of Twitchell's letters. It's a rare look inside the mind of a killer.
Nobody would side with Dexter Morgan if he went around slaughtering school teachers and mail carriers on a whim.
Police say Twitchell was fascinated by the fictional character in the hit Showtime series, Dexter.
I need to kill him. Twitchell's been dubbed the Dexter Killer because of the numerous links between the television series and the real-life crimes.
So how did this young Canadian filmmaker end up accused of horrific acts? The story begins in October 2008.
To hear how everything happened, it was like you watching the movie.
Edmonton police detective
It's hard to say. I mean,
Bill Clark.
But now we have it happening in real life. Gilles Tetreault was online on the plentyoffish.com website, which is a dating site.
Tetreault, who was 33 at the time, was excited to meet the woman who called herself Sheena.
I was actually late, so I was driving quite fast to get there. She said, I'll just leave the garage door open for you. And then you just go in, go through the garage.
I don't think he ever imagined in a million years what would happen to him in that garage.
It was dark. Then I kind of looked around for the door she told me to go through. And that's when somebody came out and attacked me from behind. Finally looked back, and that's when I see this man with this painted up hockey mask. I was just chill down my back. Wow, this is no date. He's about like 6 foot and has this black and gold hockey mask all painted up on his face.
The hockey mask wearing man had ordered him to the ground at gunpoint.
And he tore a piece of tape and he covered my eyes with it. I start hearing different things, like a jingling noise and stuff like that. In my head, it's just racing, like it's like thinking, what's going on? What's he gonna do? Is he taking another weapon out?
Gilles decided he wasn't waiting to find out.
I can't do this, I gotta fight back. So I got up and ripped the tape off my eyes. He was stunned that I got up and started yelling at me to get back down on the ground.
Instead, he grabbed the attacker's gun.
When I grabbed the gun, I felt the gun was plastic. This is the greatest feeling I ever felt in my life, because then I knew I had a fighting chance to get away. That's when I was ready to fight. I punched him and I felt really weak. I'm like, wow, why was my punch so weak?
What Gilles didn't realize was that he had been weakened by the effects of the stun baton.
And then he starts punching me on the side of the head.
Just about then, he came up with a plan.
He grabbed my jacket. I jerked forward to make sure he had a good hold on it. I thought, that's the perfect time.
That was part of your plan. You're thinking, okay, he grabs my jacket,
yeah,
and I can get free.
So that's when I slipped out of the jacket, rolled underneath the garage door, and then got up. And it worked. And I tried to run, and all of a sudden my legs wouldn't work. And I just fell, boom, right on the gravel driveway. That's when he grabbed my legs, and he started pulling me back to the garage. So I'm like, oh no, what am I gonna do now? I'm dead.
Gilles was thrown back in the garage, but he surprised himself by rolling out again. This time, Gilles managed to get into his truck.
I stuck the key in the ignition, and then I just sped away.
When Gilles got home, he discovered the profile on the dating site had been deleted, and he did his best to erase his own memory.
Why didn't you go to the police immediately?
At first I was in shock. I told myself, I'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow came, and I felt so ashamed that I got duped.
Embarrassed and confused, Gilles convinced himself that perhaps it wasn't as serious as he first thought.
I really thought it was a mugging at the time.
But just 1 week later, another man, Johnny Altinger, would answer a similar dating ad and disappear.
Where is he? What's going on? He wouldn't do this to us.
Gary Altinger, Johnny's older brother, says the last time anyone heard from him was on October 10th, 2008, when the 38-year-old left for a date with a woman named Jen.
Not a message, nothing. And then not showing up for work, totally out of character. John was very, very, very responsible.
And when did you grow concerned?
When I received that email. And this email was completely out of character.
What did it say?
I've met a woman named Jen, and I'm going away with her to Costa Rica, and I'll call you at Christmas time. I just thought right away, after I had read this, that's got to be the weirdest message I've ever received.
That identical strange message had gone out to all of Johnny's friends as well. Desperate for some answers, Johnny's friends broke into his apartment.
They found his passport, and they found dirty dishes, and they found everything just like as if he were going to return an hour or two later. And with that information, then they went to the police and they said, hey, listen, you've got to do something.
You know, his red Mazda was missing. He had taken his vehicle, it couldn't be found. So obviously that's what we're gonna look for first. Easier to find a car than a person. Based on the emails and they talk about Costa Rica, the officers search all the parking lots at the airport. It's not found. Everything's turning up negative.
But there was one clue that would give police their first big break in the case. On the day he disappeared, Johnny Altinger had forwarded the directions of where he was going to friends.
Well, John's friends were concerned. And his friend even questioned him on the email. You know, be careful. And John said, yeah, well, here's the directions, and if anything happens to me, you'll know where to look.
Armed with the directions, police were led directly to that garage.
They learned the garage is rented out to an individual named Mark Twitchell.
Action.
Twitchell, then 29 years old, a married man with a young daughter, had used the garage as a set for a recent movie project.
I'm glad I got the chance to work with you all, and I hope I see you all in the industry.
Mark denied knowing anything about a missing man or a red Mazda. and he had no problem with the police wanting to search the garage.
They have a look around and they see some what looks like blood, and Mark Twitchell's explaining, oh no, that's my movie prop. We did a film about killing a guy in here, and I filmed it all, and I've been cleaning it up over the last couple weeks. There were some things that were, you know, raising your spidey sense in this one, going, yeah, this isn't right. Something going on here.
For detectives in the Edmonton Police Department, the disappearance of Johnny Altinger was a mystery in more ways than one.
It's a missing persons case. We don't know what foul plays happened here. We don't have a body. We don't even know if we have a crime.
Their only lead was Mark Twitchell's film set garage. Voluntarily, the amateur filmmaker came down to the Edmonton Police Station to speak with detectives.
Altinger. Does that name ring a bell to you or mean anything to you?
No.
Never heard it before?
No.
Mark appeared to be eager to help. He had no history of violence and was hardly a suspect.
Action.
In fact, he seemed guilty of nothing more than wanting to brag about his film career.
I'm working on a comedy right now, which is it's actually a full-blown feature that's actually going to have a decent budget in the neighborhood of about $3.5 million.
Mark Twitchell's first film project, a Star Wars fan film, had received some media buzz back in 2007.
Word has gotten around that I'm making a $100 million movie for 60 grand, and some production and directing jobs have already come my way.
But the police were more interested in Mark's latest production, a suspense thriller called House of Cards, where a hockey-masked serial killer lures a man to a garage via the internet and kills him.
I mean, it's kind of odd that you're filming that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we end up going to that garage because of a missing person who supposedly went there.
That's really freaky too, and as soon as they called me on the phone, I get this weird chill.
He looked pretty comfortable in the interview, and when it was done and I watched it, I went, wow, that guy interviewed well.
Hours later, Mark Twitchell even agreed to let officers back into the garage where he had filmed House of Cards. Little did they know the case was about to take an unusual turn.
Detective Murphy goes, you know, and meets him and talks to him, and there's this huge revelation about, oh yeah, I bought a red car off a guy. It's like, I remember getting the phone call at the police station just thinking, holy crap.
That's because police were still looking for Johnny Altinger's red Mazda. So investigators called Mark again, and again he voluntarily agreed to answer more questions. This time, Bill Clark conducted the interview.
So as you know, Mark, we're just here trying to find this John fella, John Altinger.
Mm-hmm.
Clark listened while Mark told him how he came into possession of a red car, a detail he failed to mention when he spoke with police earlier.
This guy taps on my window, you know, hey buddy, do you want to buy a car? I have shacked up with this really rich lady, and she's going to buy me a new car. So I'm just looking to unload mine. How much do you have on you? And
Mark claimed he bought the red Mazda for just $40 and that it was parked at a friend's house.
So what are you thinking when you hear that he purchased a car for $40?
I just thought that's unbelievable. That's just, right away I'm thinking to myself, this is a bunch of crap.
The strange story about the red car, the serial killer movie being filmed. For Clark, it could only mean one thing.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that you're involved in the disappearance of John Altinger. No doubt in my mind at all, Mark.
Why?
But it was only a hunch. Clark had no hard evidence against Mark. Police began digging deeper into his background. They were interested in speaking with anyone who had worked on House of Cards, where actor Chris Hewart's character meets an untimely, bloody end in the film.
My character was killed with the samurai sword. As they said, they would have a mannequin or a dummy to run the sword through, and when I got there, there was none. I looked at the weapons. That was my first time. When I saw that they were real, I thought, This is off. I'm thinking, why didn't I tell somebody where I am?
Heward left the garage film set unharmed, but rattled, and his unease only escalated when police asked him about that allegedly fake movie blood they spotted in the garage.
How much of the blood splatter on the wall was from your filming? And I said, none of the blood splatter was from us.
And then, in a search of Twitchell's belongings, police found his laptop.
They pulled off a hard drive a deleted file titled SK Confessions.
SK Confessions. Police believed SK was shorthand for serial killer.
One of the first lines it says, I'm not sure when I decided to become a serial killer, but it was a feeling of pure euphoria.
SK Confessions told the story of a man who was lured to a garage and stabbed to death, a plot strikingly similar to House of Cards. I plunged the knife deep into his neck.
It was unbelievable. I just remember reading it all and just was fascinated by this document going, holy mackerel.
But was the document a screenplay, or was it in fact Mark Twitchell's confession of murder?
It just doesn't make sense. Where there's smoke, there's fire.
2 weeks after the disappearance of Johnny Altinger at a garage film set, police had sharpened their focus on filmmaker Mark Twitchell. Police cameras were rolling as the forensics team processed Twitchell's family car and the garage he rented. And a few miles away, detectives had been at the Twitchell home, where they found Jess Twitchell, Mark's unsuspecting wife of 2 years.
What I said was, we're investigating a missing persons. I believe your husband's got something to do with it, and it's quite possibly, could be a homicide. I didn't really go into anything more, but I think that was enough. I mean, she was emotional.
Police soon discovered that the Twitchell marriage was already fractured.
They had been living in, basically sleeping in separate bedrooms. She was basically living on the main floor, he was living in the basement. So there was obviously troubles in paradise there, we knew that.
Twitchell had been having an affair with an old girlfriend and lying to his wife about having a job.
We found out that he was telling his wife he was going to work every day, he had no job. He was getting his friends to invest in his alleged movie-making business with his Hollywood connections, and basically Mark Twitchell was living off their money.
Interestingly, the document police had found in Twitchell's laptop, titled SK Confessions, also referenced a crumbling marriage and secrets. It read, and went through great lengths to bring my wife over to the comfortable belief I wasn't cheating on her.
It was basically almost like a movie script.
But what was real and what was fiction? The closer police looked, the more the lines blurred. Police discovered Twitchell spent countless hours making elaborate Halloween costumes.
It's almost like at times Mark Twitchell lives in a fantasy world.
But it was Twitchell's Facebook page, comparing himself to TV's fictional serial killer Dexter Morgan, that really raised eyebrows. Mark has way too much in common with Dexter Morgan, read Twitchell's status.
He talked a lot about how he loved the show Dexter.
I need to kill him.
Twitchell even posed as Dexter Morgan on Facebook.
We all have a dark side, some darker than others. And you're not the only one to relate to Dexter. It sometimes scares me how much I relate. I mean, look at this profile.
That profile had caught the attention of a woman named Renee from Cleveland, Ohio.
I am a huge fan of the Showtime show Dexter, so I thought, oh, well, I'll be friends with him.
Eventually, Twitchell revealed his true identity.
He was a filmmaker.
We are rolling.
And he was working on a new thing called House of Cards.
Camera's rolling.
Renee was intrigued. After all, she was an aspiring writer, and her friendship with a movie maker could open doors.
I thought it was going to be like a working relationship, a working friendship. We had a lot in common.
But, you spoke to him a couple of times a day online?
A couple of times a day.
Was it flirtatious?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Their email exchanges soon became dark. It was shortly before Johnny Altinger disappeared.
We talked about, serial killers and, the psychology behind a serial killer.
At the time, Renee was upset with her ex-husband's new wife.
And I wanted her dead at the time, but I said I couldn't do it. And hypothetically, how would you get away with it?
How do you get away with it?
He said, you cut her up in little pieces. You put her in trash bags like Dexter. And since I was close to the lake, you rent a boat and dump her out in the middle of Lake Erie.
But then she began to wonder.
He said over the weekend he did something and he liked it. I crossed the line and I did something and I liked it.
And what did you take that to mean?
That he killed somebody. What other line is there to cross? Something inside my head just gave me red flags and said, he did it.
And her suspicions kept growing with another email he sent.
There's an enormous missing person, possible homicide investigation, going on centralized around a location I've been renting for film work. So of course the police have tossed my house and impounded my car. Not fun considering they won't find anything.
But Twitchell had underestimated the police.
He thought he was way smarter than the police. One of the biggest mistakes I think that he made was he had no idea how we do our job. And that was a huge advantage to us.
Adding to their circumstantial case, Twitchell possessing Altinger's car, the SK Confessions document, and his Dexter obsession, investigators finally had hard evidence. They found Altinger's blood in Twitchell's trunk.
When we got the word that the DNA matched, we briefed our tactical team, our arrest team, and we had officers ready to make the arrest.
On Halloween morning, 2008, while Twitchell was putting the finishing touches on his Halloween costume at his parents' home, police were busy laying a trap.
We got an undercover operator to work the internet and pretend he was an investor. He was lured out on the promise to meet this guy at this coffee shop, and when he got about 3 blocks from his house, the tactical team swooped in on him and took him down. Tough guy Mark Twitchell peed his pants. He was so scared, and it was a little taste of his own medicine, I guess.
Back at the station, Detective Clark and Twitchell came face to face in the interrogation room once again.
As I told you that night, I knew that you were involved in the disappearance at that time of Johnny Altinger. That's changed slightly. I now know that you killed John Altinger.
3 weeks after Altinger's disappearance, police charged Twitchell with first-degree murder. The once talkative movie director barely uttered a line.
You didn't get much of a reaction, did you?
No, he's, well, he knows not to say anything. Talking to his lawyers, he's not going to admit to anything.
He didn't have to. SK Confessions, which police had been dissecting word by word, spoke volumes. They were now convinced it was no screenplay, but rather a diary of murder. One passage about a knife read, "I thrust it into his gut." His reaction was pure Hollywood.
We do believe as investigators that the account written by Mark Twitchell in that SK Confessions is exactly what he did to John Altinger.
By now, Renee had called the police. As authorities began building their case, there was one crucial part of SK Confessions they wanted to verify, about a victim who had survived.
It was just a huge piece of evidence because not only would it verify what was written in SK Confessions, it would also have a living witness. So it was paramount that we find this person.
Detective Bill Clark knew his next move was finding the alleged victim who had escaped from Mark Twitchell's garage.
You know, one of the first things we did was check the police records, figuring hopefully someone called the police on this, and we have nothing.
But police had found a helpful clue during the search of Twitchell's home.
One of the things they had found was a hockey mask. The SK Confessions talked about how Mark Twitchell had worn this mask when he attacked both victims, but we figured it was something the first victim would key on.
Police soon took to the airwaves.
We have some details on this male victim who was attacked, and we would like him to come forward.
Gilles Tetreault was at home oblivious to the horror he had escaped when a friend told him to watch the news.
To date, we do not know who this victim is. I believe the victim entered the garage and was attacked by another male who was wearing a hockey mask.
And it's the same hockey mask that I saw. Wow, yeah, this is the guy. This is what happened to me. It's the same mask, everything.
What Gilles heard next came as an even greater shock. Another man had been lured to the same garage and met a gruesome end.
We have not found John Altinger's body.
And what were you thinking when you heard this?
I couldn't believe it. Once you find out the whole story, I knew at that point it was not just a mugging. It was actually, he was probably going to kill me. I'm like, wow, I have to go forward now. I have to come forward.
Exactly 1 month after he was attacked, Gilles Tetreault walked into the Edmonton Police Department and told police his incredible story.
I was all off balance. I couldn't run. I fell down on the gravel driveway and basically crawling. So he dragged me back to the garage.
Gilles' story matched nearly word for word what was in SK Confessions. I grabbed him by the leg, as if to drag him back into the garage, caveman style.
So I know that this diary we have is true.
After this all happened, I realized how lucky I was.
7 days after Gilles was attacked, police say Twitchell wasn't going to make the same mistake twice.
How did he kill John?
We know that he lured him to the garage in the same way he lured Gilles Tetreault. And then in this case, because he learned from Gilles that the taser didn't work, he hit him over the head with a lead pipe.
Following the narrative, police believe Altinger was then stabbed and dismembered on a makeshift autopsy table.
What was the most damning piece of evidence that you discovered?
We had, luminol tests done on the floor. Large amounts of blood had been spilled on the floor of the garage. Probably one of the biggest pieces, a piece of tooth that was found inside there. That piece of tooth matched up to our victim.
According to SK Confessions, the killer then broke into Altinger's apartment and sent out those emails about taking an exotic vacation. The killer then attempted to burn the remains in a barrel, but failed. He next tried to dump them into the river, but was afraid of being seen.
Ultimately, Mark Twitchell drove around with it, according to the SK Confessions document. He even talked about driving around with them and pulling up beside people at red lights and looking at them and thinking that they don't know I have a dead body in the trunk of my car.
But where was Johnny Altinger's body? SK Confessions described the killer finally choosing a sewer to dump the remains. But that's where the pages stopped. It was a story without an ending.
In any homicide investigation, you obviously want to bring closure to the family. So not only do you want to make that phone call saying, we got the guy that did this to your loved one, but in this case, we wanted to say to him, look, we found Johnny.
Detective Clark hoped Twitchell would provide the final chapter.
I'm going to get the car ready. We're going to take a drive.
You guys were driving around and there was a camera trained on him in the back of the police car. Tell me about that.
When you read all the experts' books about these type of individuals, is they tend to like the media attention. So we thought, well, maybe if we drive him around and we'll put a camera on him, maybe we'll just take him to places. Because we had no idea where Johnny's remains were at that time.
So in order to finish the movie, we find the body, take it back to the people. Family. Done. Movie's over. You can write it all down.
Detective Clark was relentless, taking Twitchell on a tour of his old neighborhood.
And we first drove to his parents' house where he had been staying. We actually demanded that he tell us. He wouldn't.
Look familiar, Mark? Are we parked right on top of the sewer where you dumped the body?
Next stop, the scene of the crime.
So here we are, back at the killing garage, the Dexter garage. Bring back any memories? You want to tell us where the body is now? We'll get this over with.
But Twitchell remained silent. So police kept searching on their own, looking in sewer
after sewer.
So all these manhole covers were pulled off in this alley. So anytime I'd see one, I always had my flashlight with me and would get out and actually take a look.
Weeks, then months passed, and still no luck. Then a year and a half after Johnny Altinger disappeared, Twitchell, while awaiting trial, broke his silence and gave the police a map.
Just up here on the left, it's about a block south of his parents' house.
Investigators followed it to an alleyway just a half block away from where they had stopped the search.
And he had marked an X. X marks the spot. It took us right to this sewer cover here. We could see what looked like pieces of human torso down there.
In March of 2011, Mark Twitchell went on trial for the murder of Johnny Altinger. Prosecutors called Jill Tetreault to testify and to prove that what Twitchell described in SK Confessions was not a work of fiction, but an account of what had actually happened.
I wasn't really afraid of him at that time. I knew he couldn't hurt me anymore.
The only witness the defense called was Mark Twitchell, and he had one unbelievable tale to tell. Steve Lillebuen, a college professor and an investigative journalist, was covering the trial for the Edmonton Journal and went on to write a book, The Devil's Cinema, about the case.
Mark Twitchell testified that this was all a big misunderstanding and he had killed Johnny in self-defense.
Twitchell claimed that Altinger's death was nothing more than a publicity stunt gone horribly awry. He said he intended to let both men go so they would create a buzz for his film by telling people that this had actually happened to them. But he claimed Altinger became enraged at being tricked, and he accidentally killed him in self-defense.
He blames Johnny, saying it was Johnny's reaction to his attempt at this promotion is what happened.
In the end, the jury took just 5 hours to find Mark Twitchell guilty. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. But for Lillebuen, there were still so many questions.
So the motive is the mystery. The why did he do this? What is Mark Twitchell's psyche? What led to this happening?
Questions Lillebuen hoped might be answered when he got a call out of the blue from Mark Twitchell himself.
He just said straight out, if you're going to be writing a book about me, you might as well come straight to the source.
What do you think Mark Twitchell's motive was? See the evidence presented at trial and more at 48hours.com.
The first time I met him, he actually had me laughing. He's very charismatic.
Mark Twitchell was nothing like author Steve Lillebuen expected.
Has very much that salesman, slick behavior. He knows how to put it on to get people to like him.
Twitchell began writing to Lillebuen before he was even convicted in 2011. Over the course of almost 3 years, they exchanged dozens of letters.
I learned really quickly that he preferred to talk through writing.
These weren't ramblings of a crazy man. There was actually some substance in these letters.
Yes, absolutely. So he's not crazy. He is lucid.
At first, Lillebuen didn't want to push Twitchell away with too many probing questions about his crimes.
I asked him a lot of softball questions just about who he was, his family, his upbringing, all that kind of background detail. He was newly married and a new father, so he was just a typical local guy who had dreams of making it big in Hollywood, and really no red flags, no warning signs that something like this was on the horizon.
In letters, Twitchell clung to his defense that he had no choice but to kill Johnny Altinger, and then dismember him.
He writes, I killed Johnny Altinger in a horrific accident of self-defense. After cursorily shoving aside my human sensibilities, I dealt with his remains in a disrespectful manner that traumatized me forever. He still is adamant that this was not a planned and deliberate murder. And to be frank, he's wrong.
Lillebuen points to SK Confessions,
where Twitchell describes how he turned that garage into a kill room, set up a makeshift autopsy table, had plastic sheeting, and a processing kit similar to the one Dexter Morgan used.
Mark Twitchell wrote to me quite extensively about his interest in Dexter.
Dexter on his mind, Twitchell drew this portrait of Michael C. Hall, the actor who plays him. And to Lil Buell's surprise, even behind bars, Twitchell was able to feed his obsessions.
Previously on Dexter.
Mark Twitchell had actually been granted access to finish watching the series while he was incarcerated.
In 2012, Dexter star Michael C. Hall was asked about Mark Twitchell on a Canadian radio program.
It's horrifying to entertain the notion that something you did inspired that.
Twitchell's response to Hall's comments was to downplay his fascination with the Dexter character.
So he wrote to me, "As you're aware, Dexter has almost nothing to do with my case."
Throughout their correspondence, Lil Buell continued to grapple with what drove Twitchell. And then Twitchell told him,
There is no key, no root cause. There's no school bully or impressionable gory movies or Showtime television series to point the finger at. It is what it is, and I am what I am.
He's a depraved individual, and he knows that.
Retired FBI criminal profiler Julia Calley didn't work on this case, but she spoke with Detective Clark and reviewed Mark Twitchell's writings and letters for 48 hours. She thinks she knows what made Twitchell tick.
I think he identified with Dexter to some degree. I think he's different than Dexter.
He's not killing bad guys. He's killing very innocent, good people living productive lives.
And while he's technically not a serial killer, he was headed in that direction if they hadn't have caught him.
Calley believes Twitchell took pleasure in planning and executing his crimes as if they were romantic trysts.
I think the primary motivation was sexual.
Sexual?
Yes. And he's targeting men that perhaps he would be interested in having a date with.
It's a combination of sexual motive and a thrill killing.
He's pretending to be a woman. He writes extensively about what he's going to wear, the weapon that he chooses. He sort of describes it in seductive language. He said, I wanted the weapon used for the deed itself to be simple, elegant, and beautiful.
And in a strange twist, Twitchell's been able to feed that obsession too. In 2017, he was allowed to join an online dating website for inmates.
Which, I find quite surprising considering the way he ended up in prison. I believe it's been taken down since then.
The man who was tricked into that very bad date in Twitchell's garage, Gilles Tetreault, continues to be haunted by the experience. We caught up with him recently.
I still think about the painted up hockey mask. I still think about the stun gun, the fight for my life.
In 2023, Twitchell will be eligible to apply for early parole. Experts say it's a long shot, but it worries Gilles.
I'm scared that he might want to finish what he started and come after me.
Mark Twitchell cannot be rehabilitated. This is who he is.
Action.
And for Mark Twitchell, the aspiring filmmaker, there may be one final plot twist. Author Steve Lillibuen sold the rights to his book, The Devil Cinema, to a film company. Twitchell's story may be coming to the big screen.
An Olympic horseman.
He was a legend.
A falling out with a student. She attacked him on social media.
911 operator. I've been shot in the home.
He says she drove him to do it. The verdict. 48 Hours, next on CBS.